This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Quiet on the set. Soon we will all be more informed.
We appreciate learning more of our region's news and public affairs. Cameras rolling.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Waiting for announcements was in the news this week. From Washington, there was the expected word about who the Democrats' vice presidential candidate might be. And from the local federal courthouse, rumor watchers were anticipating more news about indictments. Most revealing was a newspaper feature in which Archbishop Aymond frankly commented on the responsibilities of his predecessors in the sexual abuse scandals. Wherever there is controversy, there are usual calls for unity, and we will hear a local columnist analysis of that concept, and we'll look at vice presidential candidates in Louisiana, including a time when a contender merely flew above the waiting crowd on the way to somewhere else. Joining us are our Informed Sources tonight. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio. Will Sutton, columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Stephanie Regal, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Dave, let's go on over to you. Any more indictments out of federal court today that we'd be interested in?
No, but we do know that if there are going to be indictments in the case where Mayor Cantrell allegedly accepted bribes to fire one of her senior staffers, it's probably going to come sooner than later. Typically, we've seen at federal court in New Orleans, grand juries handing up indictments late on Thursdays, early on Fridays. So there was a cadre of reporters gathered outside of federal court again today in the event that we did have indictments come. As of now, we have not seen or heard of any new indictments, but the allegations that Cantrell fired City Deputy Director of Safety and Permits Jennifer Cecil in exchange for bribes from private business owner Randy Farrell are coming up on a 5-year deadline of when one of those bribes allegedly occurred that could trigger a statute of limitations. So all indications are based on subpoenas that have gone out, hiring of attorneys that we've seen, and all of the other normal activities that precede an indictment, that we could very soon, if the grand jury believes there's enough evidence to take this case to trial, could see indictments.
Background us a little bit on this.
So Randy Farrell owns a company that provides private inspectors to supplement the city of New Orleans, Jefferson Parish, city of Kenner, and other municipalities in the region to do inspections on work that is done following the completion of construction when a permit's been issued. So his company sends people out after, say, an electrical project is completed during construction or renovation of a home to inspect and make sure that it was all done properly and that the permit qualifications have been met and that it can be approved and checked off. The scheme, as it's been described and reported, is that Farrell not only wanted to get the money for doing the inspections, but also wanted money for doing the contracting work. So it's alleged that he bribed officials to get records changed to get him to be able to do electrical work, for example, and get it filed under somebody else's name so he could then come back in and do the inspection of the property and get that pot of money as well. Well, apparently Cecil caught wind of this alleged scheme and had gone to the Inspector General for the city of New Orleans and was starting to initiate an investigation into Farrell. Farrell allegedly then bribed Cantrell so she would fire Cecil to stop this effort to investigate him and uncover what he was doing.
And as you say, that was almost 5 years ago, so
Correct.
the time's running out.
August of 2019, amongst the things he allegedly bribed her with were tickets to Saints playoff games. The famous no-call game in the Superdome was allegedly one of the things he gave her tickets for as part of their agreement to fire Cecil.
She should get some mercy for having to go to the no-call game.
Yeah, well, Cecil was fired 5 years ago this coming August.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the completion of the alleged transaction of the bribery. So that's why the statute of limitations. Now, the federal government has ways of extending the period of prescription, and if they can show any continuing actions as part of a scheme, they can make the case to a judge to extend that 5-year deadline. But they would prefer not to do that. So all expectations are that if they're going to have indictments in this case where Farrell allegedly bribed Cantrell to fire Cecil, that we would see those handed up very soon, because they don't want to wait to the last day in case there's any procedural issues. And the writing on the wall seems to be that Farrell would have pretty good motivation to turn state's evidence to flip, to testify against Cantrell. He's already been convicted of not paying taxes and agreed in a bargain with the federal government to pay back some $1 million in unpaid taxes. And evidence was that he even had sent emails to his accountant telling him to hide $500,000 from the feds. And one of his employees, James Muhammad, who also was in charge of permits and inspections for Kenner, has also been convicted in a very similar bribery scheme to Farrell. So he's got to see that he, like Muhammad, could get sentenced to years in prison.
A lot of characters that we're trying to keep track of here, but you know, that investigation has nothing to do with the indictments that was handed down, indictments that were handed down last
In the
week.
Jeffrey Vappy case.
Yeah, in the
No.
Jeffrey Vappy case. However, a suit was filed that's related somewhat to that Jeffrey
So
Vappy
the
case.
Jeffrey Vappy case really came to a head when pictures of Mayor Cantrell and her NOPD bodyguard, Jeffrey Vappy, were at a French Quarter restaurant on a balcony, drinking wine and looking very much in love with each other. And that kind of was a spark to the investigation that allowed the federal government to move forward and deliver the indictments against Vappy. Well, you remember Cantrell sued Ann Brode, the woman who took those pictures, and made allegations that she was stalking the mayor, and also got a hold of information from a previous NOPD arrest that was eventually dismissed, though it had detailed information about Brode in it. Now Brode is saying that by getting 4 members of the New Orleans Police Department to conspire to give that information that was private to the mayor, which the mayor then included in her lawsuit against Brode, violated her civil rights. So this morning, Brode filed in federal district court a petition for a lawsuit of a violation of her civil rights by Cantrell. The real significance of that is not only does Cantrell now have another legal issue to deal with in this civil lawsuit, but it could put her under oath and on the stand. She has not had to answer questions under oath about any of this yet.
Interesting, and of course what Cantrell filed was dismissed.
Correct.
And the judge threw that out.
Yeah, and it was dismissed, and Cantrell was ordered to pay Brode's legal fees because it was determined there was absolutely no basis for the lawsuit that Cantrell brought for the restraining order in civil district court.
All right, a lot to keep track of here, Dave. Thanks a lot. All righty. Over to you, Stephanie. You had a big piece about the Archbishop. You had a long sit down with him over the course of 3 days, the Archbishop of New Orleans, Gregory Aymond. And I mean, what was it all like? What's his demeanor like? How is he feeling? What did he say?
It was really the most difficult thing I've ever written. And it was difficult to do the interviews. And to his credit, you know, he made himself available and sat down with us over the course of 3 days, a total of nearly 6 hours, and opened up as much as he can, and that's not a lot. He's very guarded. He's very cautious. I mean, he's a quiet, serious person, and I think he's very media shy, gun shy, and doesn't trust the media, and really had no reason to trust me or the newspaper or anything. I think the purpose of what he was trying to get out of it was to talk about things that the church is doing, good news, things in the church outside of the bankruptcy and the sex abuse scandals, to try to explain why they filed bankruptcy more than 4 years ago now, to try to maybe help people understand, that they see it as a way to potentially bring some sort of justice to all the survivors in this case, rather than just to a few. And I think he was probably also hoping that we might focus more on some of the positive things that are going on in the church. But, I mean, the challenge and the difficulty in writing a story like that is that you can't overlook the abuse scandal and the impact that it's had, and the financial challenges that the church is facing. And that to me was some of the most interesting things that we talked about, just really getting a better, richer understanding of the financial challenges that this archdiocese does face going forward. We had written about this last year when they announced some church closures. He said this time that there's going to be more parish closures later this year, because even though they have a lot of real estate on the books with a huge insured replacement value, I mean, critics of Aymond and the archdiocese have said, my God, they've got $2.1 billion worth of real estate. Well, on paper, that's the insured replacement value, but you're not going to get $25 million for, St. Joseph's Church or Our Lady Star of the Sea Church out on St. Rock. I mean, nobody's going to pay that, and a lot of these churches aren't really going to be up for sale anyway, right?
Yeah, so it is really a fiscal issue, which surprised him because he expected it to be much lower when this all first started. What are his feelings? What did he express about his predecessors?
That was something that I really tried to press him on. And at one point, I said, they have to shoulder some of the blame. And he said, certainly, certainly. And then he caught himself and said, but I don't want to blame them. I don't want to blame them. He's big on forgiveness. He wrote a book about forgiveness in 2007 with a couple of colleagues. And I think he just doesn't want to go there. I think there are very many legitimate legal issues, maybe reasons why he can't, but I think in his mind, this is about trying to, the way he sees it, there were sins or wrongs or mistakes, but we have to move past it. And I think that's never going to be good enough for a lot of people in the community, and certainly never going to be good enough for the survivors community. That's the problem.
Did he comment about several reports that our colleagues have done recently that were contrary to what the church released when they said they were being transparent? They were releasing all of the credible
and then they did
claims
and that was
of abuse. And then we keep finding additional claims that weren't on that list.
Well, I know. And we even talked about, he said there was only, one abuse case that happened on my watch. Well, technically, yes, but there were lots of other little things that happened that we pointed out in the story. And so, I think there's never going to be the kind of full reckoning that people want.
And so he says he will one day sit down with survivors?
He said he's very willing to sit down with survivors, not just one-on-one, but he's willing to meet with them in a space that's of their choosing, a safe space where maybe several survivors at one time could get with him, small groups preferably. He said he's willing to do that. But there are legal issues about whether that can be done now and at what point that could happen. And in fact, the archdiocese fought successfully a motion that was before the bankruptcy judge just a few weeks back, where some of the survivor attorneys had asked if survivors could have a few minutes after each of the regularly monthly scheduled hearings to speak their mind, to give their piece, to have their day in court. And they said, no, that would prejudice the judge. And so it seems like there are always roadblocks. The biggest challenge, I think, we had in his mind, this all happened in the past, in a different era. And his explanation, and he says it's not an excuse, but it's an explanation, is that in the 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s, we knew less about pedophilia. We thought we could, help cure it. We could send people to psychological treatment and they would be cured. But that still doesn't explain how it was always a crime, and it should have always been reported. And he would say, yes, of course it should have been reported.
Right.
It should have been reported.
And he's staying with it, too. He's not stepping down. He says until this bankruptcy is settled.
He's very committed to seeing it through, and it is very difficult. And you know, I believe he wants to do the right thing, what he believes is the right thing. But there are people who don't believe that that's possible.
Stephanie, I just want to comment that as a writer, I think you painted a great scene where in the room where you were interviewing him, there were the pictures of his predecessors in the background. So there they are. Here are the pictures, and so he can comment on them. He's right there. They're looking over him and all that. And the description of it, I think, was really good. I detected some real sincerity in it all.
I think he's very sincere, and he tried. I mean, he made himself available and was vulnerable, you know, and so I applaud him for that, you know, and we interviewed people who said he is a wonderful, compassionate man, and he is pained by this and doing the best he can. We interviewed people who said he's the, you know, latest in a long list of clerical liars that's covering up this systemic abuse, and people who were somewhere in the middle who said, you know, he's doing the best he can personally, but it's not about him personally. So we tried to be balanced.
And it's a really compelling read, so it's on NOLA.com, right? You can
Yes.
find it. All right, Steph, thanks. Hey, over to you. You wanted to talk about regarding this vice presidential thing, Louisiana and federal.
Well, one of the big stories this week, of course, is when Joe Biden dropped out and Kamala Harris overnight just became this major front runner. And so that started to talk, well, who's she going to pick as vice president? And so that talk began immediately. And on the list, I think by the second and third day, the so-called vetted list, one of them was Cedric Richmond from New Orleans, and which was a surprise. But he's been around. Cedric Richmond might be a great vice president. He's not from a state that's a great state to be a vice president from. Okay, it's a small state. It's a small electoral vote state. It's a state that's going to go for Trump, and so Cedric Richmond's not going to be the pick. But at least it was an honor to be selected. But that made me think about people from Louisiana who'd received White House recognition in different ways. Cedric Richmond already had. He started off early in the Biden administration, head of the Office of Public Engagement, whatever that is. But it sounds like a good thing to be. But the Mayor Moon Landrieu, when he was finished, he was selected by Jimmy Carter to be Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And if an experienced mayor, he was probably the best guy in the nation to do that. Mitch Landrieu, after the time as mayor, was sort of like the overseer of the whole public infrastructure project, which was just a big job. Before all of this, there was Shep Morrison, who was mayor of New Orleans, served 4 terms. And in his 4th term, John Kennedy appointed him ambassador to the Organization of American States. And one person who got actually became a nominee was Dan Quayle. And that was in the 1988 convention where George Bush appointed him. He was in New Orleans. So he appointed him at an event at the Riverwalk on the stage there. So we've touched federal office in different ways, never gotten all the way. Yeah.
In different ways, yes. Cedric Richmond, I think, has been quoted as saying, not happening.
Yeah.
Right.
And Will, let's go on over to you. And, you know, staying sort of, you know, with this overall theme of the country, and unity is a word that's really come up a lot in the past week and a half since the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. You had some thoughts about that?
I do. Unity is one of those things that after significant events, we say we should come together. And I don't think there's anybody who would argue that we shouldn't come together. But there's a pretty big difference between coming together and wanting the Saints to win.
We can unify around that.
Right. Versus coming together and saying because someone was hurt, we're going to go beyond thoughts and prayers and unify behind a candidacy or a cause, especially with people so divided and somebody who is divisive. There are things that happened in the hours after the attempted assassination, and even in the days where people were saying unity, unity, unity. I think if that had happened with someone different, I think there would still be some calls for unity, maybe not at the same volume, because he is such a notable and likable figure for a lot of people. But what got me is all the talk about unity in the first several hours and days, and in the context of a presidential campaign and then other campaigns, we're not unified on the issues. And so I believe we can be for unity as long as the unity doesn't mean to stifle voices. And I use the Freedom Summer example because there were people who were in Mississippi saying we don't need integration, we like segregation, this is the right thing to do. There was such efforts on voter suppression that they had these ridiculous tests and other things that had to be done. But that was a unifying effort for that group of people. Was it right? They thought they were right at that time. Can we look back and say it was wrong? Yes, we can. That was wrong. It wasn't right. Were these young people who gave their lives seeking a different kind of unity, was that right for them to be killed as a result of their efforts? No. And were they right for pursuing more equal rights and voter rights for Black Mississippians? Absolutely. But those are two different efforts of unity, but based on political philosophy. 9/11 was a wonderful example where it wasn't just unity for a few hours or a few days. It lasted for quite a while. And truth be told, people who were politically against President George Bush agreed with that sentiment of unity. Now, that lasted for a good long time. We got some great things out of that, and I argue, including Homeland Security. But there are other things where we still had differences of opinion politically and philosophically.
So yes, in these United States, I mean, there has always been differences of opinion. From its earliest days, when it was first being founded, there was not a whole unified idea of how everything should be achieved. We've had differences of opinion, but we're still a United States of America.
It says something that, ultimately they called it the United States. Okay,
right.
They really,
and we can unify, it seems, most successfully when we have a common enemy in times of war. We're really good at unifying against the Nazis, against Al-Qaeda, against a common enemy. But short of that, it was nice to hear both sides saying they wanted to lower the temperature of the rhetoric in the wake of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump.
For a while.
But it only lasted a few days. They couldn't even unify in not calling each other names and not using inflammatory speech anymore. We're right back to where we were 2 weeks ago.
But there's a whole new set of issues now, too. For example, social media. Okay, the way people can communicate now, I mean, just in seconds back and forth.
Well, and even traditional media today, people can't agree on what truth is. So we might have had policy disagreements in the past, but we were agreeing on a common set of facts. Today, you've got warring media networks and channels and platforms where, post-truth era, you can't unify in a post-truth era.
And they thrive on divisiveness.
Exactly.
They get their ratings from divisiveness. And social media really, it heartbeats. Its heartbeat is on getting people angry and riled up. So.
Well, it used to be like the news networks. At least there was a pretense of being neutral. At least they tried. Now you look at one network. Well, this is the conservative network. Okay, this is the more. I mean, that's their mission, and they don't hide what they're doing. And maybe it's good in the long run. I don't know. Maybe it's a diversity of opinions, but better that than the Russian system.
We can agree on that. We can unify around that.
And also we're unified in realizing that we're going to run out of time real soon, too. So let's go to your that last segment, and you wanted to talk about
this is the week about talking about vice presidential selections, okay? It brought to mind in 1972 when George McGovern was nominated president. He didn't have a chance in the world to win. I mean, he was going to be champion of the Vietnam War. But he selected a guy named Tom Eagleton, who was a senator from Missouri. So you had McGovern and Eagleton who were running against Nixon. Campaign starts, and they find out that Eagleton had problems with depression. He had electric shock treatment. He had been in the hospital a lot. For some reason, that didn't become public. And so they figured, you can't be electing someone vice president and a heartbeat away from being president if they had electrical shock treatments. And so they had it was the Democratic National Committee that, because this is after the convention, they got together and selected Sergeant Shriver, who was a Kennedy crony, a guy who started the Peace Corps. And he started, and I think it was a popular choice. But there was this night, he started his campaigning late, and he was coming to Louisiana to speak in Lafayette. He had friends with the Reggie family in Crowley, and a huge crowd gathered in Lafayette. These are the people, the McGovern people, big crowd. It was kind of a cold night. People are waiting. The announcement comes, ladies and gentlemen, Sergeant Shriver, flight delayed, we can't land tonight. So they fly over and they go to Baton Rouge, where Edwin Edwards and Moon Landrieu were waiting for him. And
so all the crowd could do was wave at the plane, huh?
Yeah.
That was about it.
Yeah.
All right, E, other stories, over to you.
Well, if you've ordered your silly string and your sofas from Mardi Gras, cancel the order, okay? Because of the changes on whether or not it's enforceable, we'll just have to see.
Okay, all right, Dave.
Well, I'll stick on let's unite.
Yes.
The Saints put on the pads Monday in training camp, and not this weekend, but the following weekend. We have our first preseason game in Arizona coming up after that. So football season is right around the corner.
That's hard to believe, right around the
Kamara
corner.
was out.
All right, Will.
he
Will.
showed up, yeah.
Yeah, I want to recognize Bill Rosell,
Oh, yeah.
first black news reporter in New Orleans. Died a few days ago. A mentor to so many, deeply involved in community advocacy, deeply involved in politics in such a good way, and a guy that wanted to help however he could, putting things together, and didn't want to be at the microphone. So rest in power, Mr. Bill.
Communications, certainly, and also business. He was quite the businessman as well. He had a great business going. All right, you're quite right. Stephanie.
Well, the executive search is on for Ron Foreman's replacement as head of the Audubon Nature Institute. I take a look this Sunday at the overwhelming amount of applications they have received, and also at the new position that Foreman is going to have at the Institute and its foundation. All
righty. Thanks, guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us, too. And we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Public television is our passion. With so much content that WYES broadcasts and presents online, we are quite entertained and highly informed.
Please join us in supporting WYES.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.